the VA's HiveMeet. I'm Andrew Wooden and we're streaming live to YouTube. After a holiday break, we're back again and it's very exciting to be here, especially since we've got Varroa in Melbourne. So it's very important for us to be aware of what's going on with our biosecurity. As usual, we've got questions and answers can be asked in the chat window on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'd like you to participate. I'm in a virtual studio here in Melbourne. We're on a skeleton staff tonight because Paul is in Egypt digging up Roman legionnaires. But we do have Tino in the studio with us, so I'll hand over to Tino now.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Here is the heat map for Victoria, and as you can see, Varroa is spreading as we expected. It's really important that all beekeepers are doing monthly mite tests and alcohol washes to monitor the mite numbers and if detect new detections, particularly heading into fall. That's why we're here as HiveMeet, to keep beekeepers in Victoria educated and up to date on what's happening with Varroa and how to manage this parasite. We want to take an opportunity to thank our sponsors tonight, BeQual and BeTrace. These are quality assurance programs, national quality assurance programs. BeQual is for beekeepers with more than 300 hives, and BeTrace is for beekeepers with fewer than 300 hives. We encourage all beekeepers to visit the website and look at their offerings and consider signing up. And now back to Andrew to introduce our guest for this evening.
Our guest today is Graham Abry from Busby. He has extensive experience in Varroa management because he's kept bees in Africa, in the UK, and in New Zealand beforehand. So he's got a lot of experience to draw on. Busby, as well as being a beekeeping equipment supplier, also makes queens and colonies available. Welcome, Graham. Thank you very much for coming along. At the end of Graham's presentation, we'll go to the chat room and do some questions and answers. Over to you, Graham.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. As Andrew said, well, I've been around a few places around the world, and so really my unfortunate first encounter of Varroa was actually in the UK. And as a result of that's obviously where I started understanding the different type of techniques to try and get on top of the Varroa. And one of the main topics or one of the main chemicals that came up was obviously oxalic acid, and was used incredibly widely, not only in the UK, but certainly across Europe. And there's a number of reasons behind that. Today, we're going to go through obviously various different areas, predominantly concentrating on oxalic acid. But just to be aware that oxalic acid is an incredibly versatile product. Those that don't know what it looks similar to salt, the texture of salt, and the grains are like salt, but obviously it is an acid-based product. But it's used in maybe 3 to 4 different ways. The one is called a dribble test, where it's put in a syringe. We'll go through this in a bit more detail soon. Another one, vaporization, which is effectively put it under high heat, effectively, and that effectively vaporizes into a gas and a smoke that goes through the hive. And another technique that's very well known is basically a strip, which is a slow release strip and put into the hive, which is got a combination usually of glycerine and oxalic acid part of that. And maybe a fourth method that people are not very familiar, which we're not going to go through today, but it's a spray where you have predominantly it's a water with oxalic acid and a very mild solution of this spray directly on bees, but it's not very commonly used in Varroa treatment processes. But the question, first of all, why is oxalic acid so popular? And it's not just potentially in Australia, but also right away around the world. And if you look at the bottom left area, this is roughly global population figures coming out. It's between 45 to 55% of treatments are that oxalic acid. Yes, there's amatraz and other type of things, but it doesn't mean it's when people are doing a treatment is solely oxalic acid all the time, but it is one of the main type of chemicals used in the actual treatment of the Varroa mite. And there's a number of reasons behind that. Yes, is because when you're using it, you can use it when you've got honey supers on. So that's one of the major pluses, particularly in Australia where we've got a lot of honey, and it's very hard to get a period that we don't have honey on sometimes. Low residual risk, so it burns off very quickly. So if you want to cultivate it, there's very little residue left of oxalic acid after a few hours because it naturally breaks down. One of the biggest things from a commercial perspective is cost effective at scale. So if you actually have as long as you've got the equipment available, the actual cost for actual per treatment can be very much reduced versus other type of chemicals. And one thing that really is that to talk about, we just touched on, is the resistance. Resistance, as I'm sure many people are aware, some of the synthetics are getting to be well known, that over time those synthetics become more, so the varroa becomes more resistant to some of those chemicals. In Australia, I don't think that's going to happen immediately because we've got the new varroa mite effectively coming into Australia. So it might take a few years before we might see issues from the synthetics perspective where the resistance might come in. But down the road, we might have those problems. But from a oxalic acid perspective, no evidence showing there's a resistance to oxalic acid at all. On the right-hand side, you can get an idea sort of costs of per pieces. Those green figures are the official numbers on more the official products, and there's other byproducts out there that may be in black as well, but give you an idea of the cost per treatments as well. If we keep moving on. Okay, so the question is, how does it actually kill the oxalic acid? Sorry, how does it kill the varroa mite oxalic acid? Why is it so popular? And actually, if you first of all, you need to understand a bit about the biology of the actual varroa mite. The varroa mite actually has very damp feet. And that's how also they use to attach themselves onto the actual bee as they move around. And it's that actual damp feet is actually part of their downfall, where as they touch a crystal of oxalic acid, effectively it sticks to their feet. And over time, it builds up more and more crystals attached to the physical feet. And they can't shake it off. They're trying to do it, but they cannot take it off. But also, the actual legs are actually absorb nutrients from that oxalic acid into their body through the actual legs and effectively hits the nervous system and effectively is the downfall of the insect. So that's effectively how it really the main reason or the main process of how the oxalic acid kills the actual physical varroa mite itself. And okay, so I'm sure many of you have seen this before. Why don't we just use vegetables? Because a lot of vegetables out there actually has oxalic acid in them. So why are you just thinking? But as I sort of just touched on from the previous slide, that you obviously have the varroa mite going across different areas where they are coming in contact directly with the oxalic acid. Where if you've got rhubarb leaves, I'm going to say, sitting on top of your actual frames, it's unlikely your varroa is going to go on the top of there and touch it. And to be honest, the doses are so low. So unfortunately, the long story short is that the actual mites are never going to come in contact with this type of this oxalic acid in the plant, and it's never going to be as effective. So it's never going to work. Okay. Now let's go through the three different methods of starting with the actual dribble test itself. Okay, so the first one is going to be, first of all, the effectiveness. Now, this, from an oxalic acid perspective, is always best performed if it's in a broodless state. So if you've got a broodless state, that can be very hard to achieve, obviously, in Australia, apart from the very cold months. In Victoria, we might get away with it more so than up the northern states as well. But if you get 90-95% of a broodless colony, then a dribble test can be worked very well. So maybe sometimes in the cooler temperatures, the cooler months, is the time when you may want to apply this method. One thing about the dribble test is incredibly effective. Works very well if you've got a high mite count, but it does have to be in a broodless state. Okay, so you're applying this via usually a syringe. It's in a liquid format, and you use some form of applicator. Either it's in like a syringe or some device that actually has a measurement, and you can squeeze that over between the physical frames. And it's important that you don't put more than 50 milliliters per whole hive. Okay, so if you've got a double box, you have to spread that lava between those different boxes. So be aware of that. Generally, you're doing the lower amount of about 3 milliliters. But if you've got a very weak hive, if you've got a large hive, then maybe up to the 5 milliliter size. But please be aware that actually this is to be used only once. It can be very severe with the bees because it is still liquid. Imagine you pouring this on directly on the bees. It can be quite harsh to the bees themselves. Okay, so yes, it can be made with a very simple solution and by using oxalic acid. And you tend to use this with like 10 parts of, let's say, sugar syrup to 1 part of the oxalic acid. However, there was some research done by Randy Oliver where he actually substituted the sugar syrup and actually used glycerine instead. And the reason behind that switch over is that sugar syrup, obviously, as we're aware, the actual bees tend to digest it sometimes. So one technique they use with the sugar syrup perspective is try and feed the bees quite extensively beforehand before you apply this method. However, we found that the glycerine method, the bees tend to not like to digest the glycerine, so therefore it is a great form of applicator, and the bees didn't tend to eat it. So using glycerine instead as a substitute. The other alternative is get it all pre-made. Amphibiox will make us a product like this, which is a bottle, and there's an applicator too. Okay, so the main advantage is it's simple, it's easy to use, it can be straight out the bottle if you have to. It's a very minimal amount of work behind, but even though it is a dribble test, you still need some actual PPE equipment. It doesn't have to be extensive as some of the other ones we'll go through in a second, but it is still important that you got latex gloves or something like that. Nylex gloves is really important, maybe something to cover your eyes in case there's any splashes, and then long sleeves just to protect the arms physically as well. If you are making it yourself, then maybe a mask of some form, a good quality mask just to cover your respiratory system as well. Okay. Okay, so that's one method to think about. But remember that method tends to be used more in the colder weather when you're more broodless. Okay, now let's go into vaporization method. And now this is a method that a lot of people are familiar with. It is also known as fumigation and sublimation. So when you think about oxalic acid, a lot of people think about vaporization. That's what usually comes to mind, and there's a good reason behind it. It is probably the most effective method of applying oxalic acid inside a hive. It's up to 99% if it is broodless. We'll come to the broodless part in a second. But it is applied by applying a huge amount of heat over 200 degrees Celsius. So obviously you don't want to be anywhere near that. But the advantage is there's no liquid. So you haven't got an issue with the dribble method where you might be dripping on the bees, where this is more a gas going around the hive, and it's not as harsh to the bees themselves. Okay. Again, the advantage, unlike the last method, where it can be only generally used once a year, this method can be used multiple times throughout a year. The official line at the moment is usually twice per year. From that, so I mean twice means 2 cycles per year. However, to my understanding and what I'm understanding the regulations go through at the moment, they're going to increase that up to 4 times a year as a cycle perspective. So that means batches of 4. Okay. It's incredibly effective, obviously, working in the hive because it goes into all the gaps that are available with that are exposed with the brood. There's serious limitations, and that is it is a hazard still because it is a gas. You do need to make sure you have the proper health and safety and mask. Okay, not just any sort of mask. We'll come to in a second, but it must be a proper mask with the right type of filter. The actual equipment is very much dependent. That's you need to make sure you have the specialized equipment from a perspective of the right type of equipment for heating that oxalic acid. And I'll come to the actual devices in a second, but you'll see what I'm talking about. But again, emphasizing oxalic acid organic does not mean safe. Is really important. You still need an immense amount of proper good quality equipment. But I want to emphasize this, that if you've got the right type of equipment, it is safe to use as long as you follow the appropriate steps. It's like anything. So follow the appropriate steps. Okay. Now, just touching on the PPE we talked about, it's important, particularly on a sublimation or the vaporization, that you have the appropriate gloves. If you look at Jack there at the moment, he's got a proper mask. He's got a correct type of filters. Now, if you look at the actual physical filter, it's got a yellow and pink band on it. Now, there's a number cartridge, 60923. That 60293 is a very specific filter for oxalic acid and formic acid. And it's a really important reason why we've chosen that type of cartridge. Now, there's another cartridge number I cannot remember, but it's just for oxalic acid. But I choose both, and I see a reason for it in a second. But I have a real concern when people are going to, like, say, a DIY store and they are getting a mask. The mask itself should be fine, but then are using those type of cartridges over the shelf. Generally, these are specialized filters, so please be careful of the type of filters you're using with this as well. Okay. And overalls, if you can, will be a good option as well, to just to cover your whole body. If you look also in this photograph, this is a little tip. If you put your hands over the actual physical areas of the actual mask and you suck in, and carefully, you should not be able to suck any air in. It should be quite tight. Almost you're dying from a perspective of not being able to breathe. So that means you've got a very nice tight seal around the physical area of the mask. So make sure you use that test. If you've got a brand new mask, you want to test it out, put your hands over the end of that mask, suck in. If you've got no air coming in, it's a really good sign. That's a good seal for the mask. Next one. Okay. So the question is, what type of vaporizers are there? There's such a wide range out there. A lot of them are, these are some more cheaper end of the brands, but they work okay. These are effectively 12 volts power supply. You put a car battery on them, but they actually do work as well on with a trickle charger, like a car battery charger as well. They work okay. Just check the amperage that they work on them as well. So that's an option of these. Another type of vaporizer is maybe when we get more serious, like this is a what's called an instant vap. This is using effectively a DIY battery system, like this in Milwaukee, but you have a range of different type of battery systems. There's gas powered ones out there as well. But the important thing that I want to really emphasize on is actually with these vaporizers that you choose the right one for you. They all have a wide range of budgets. So speak to your local beekeeping supplier of which one you think is best suitable for you for number of hives, but also that it will do the job that we expect it to. And what I'm coming to that is what I'm meaning by that is this graph. Now, this is actually quite important for those people who may not have seen this before. So oxalic acid, when you burn oxalic acid, you try to optimize the amount of burn, or the maximized amount of oxalic acid burnt. So if you look at the very along the bottom at the moment, you actually have it between 230 degrees and go up to 320. But you notice that gray, we want a lot of that dark gray. We want minimal of the light gray. So the light gray is formic acid, which is not good for the bees. It unfortunately creates fatalities. So you're trying to minimize the light gray, but you're trying to maximize the dark gray. So what you're trying to do is make sure whatever type of oxalic acid vaporizer you're using is burning your oxalic acid absolutely optimized as much as possible and minimizing the amount of formic acid. Unfortunately, when you get to a point around about here, which is around about the 280, 290, it suddenly changes. You notice the amount of light gray increases dramatically. That is formic acid. So what it's doing is turning the oxalic acid into formic acid, which is not what you're trying to achieve. So my concern on a lot of the vaporizers out there is that some of them might burn a huge amount of smoke and look really very pretty and actually it appears to be doing a lot of work for you. But in reality, it could actually be burning a lot of formic acid as well. And that could theoretically be dangerous to the bees. So what I'm trying to say is choose a vaporizer that you know that is some form of control if you can, that also has some more mechanism that can actually monitor what that temperature is. So you round in this area on the left-hand side between 230 to around about 270, 280 degrees Celsius. As soon as you go over that amount, then you potentially might be having some issues with the bees. So just be careful overheating the oxalic acid. Yes. To the next screen. The other element to be emphasized is actually the right, particularly if you're using a sublimate or a vaporizer, is use the right type of oxalic acid. Now, listen to what the manufacturers are saying about that, and a lot of them are saying use really good quality oxalic acid that you can get. And that the reason is behind it. If you've got oxalic acid that has got additives into the oxalic acid, and you don't see that necessarily in the instructions or in the breakdown of the product, then potentially might actually have a fill inside of it. And as a result, could clog up your vaporizer. And that's the last thing you want to do. So this is from other customers we've had, where literally, unfortunately, it is that additive to the oxalic acid is causing headaches and clogging up the vaporizer. Side there. Okay, so the method is, how do we go about doing a vaporization? First of all, you need to try and maximize the amount of smoke going into the hive and minimizing the loss inside. So the first thing and the biggest space that where a lot of people are not aware of is the physical floor at the very bottom. You need to make sure that's blocked off as much as possible. So a lot of those ventilated floors, which many of us have because it's hot weather here in Australia, we need to try and block those off in some form or way. And a lot of those designs actually have sort of some form of plate that goes underneath it. Use it. If you don't, then maybe a sticky mat underneath it works well. But this method, if you see in this picture, is a bit unusual. It's using a pillow. And it sounds strange why you'd use a pillow. And that's a very cheap pillow, but simple reason, by leaning the hive forward, notice it's strapped up as well. And it obviously the pillow will follow the shape of the underneath the physical hive itself. So that's really great way of trying to block up the hive. So once you're done treating, pull it off, you go to the next hive and repeat the process as well. The other area to be aware of, obviously, is any gaps, particularly the lid. If you've got a ventilated lid, maybe a bit of tape over the top of that lid might be a good idea to close it off as well. And same again will be any sort of cracks between those boxes as well. So just make sure that's aware. Now, if we look at the other area at the bottom, obviously the entrance now, at the very bottom, you need to allow a little bit of a gap, but obviously you usually have a wide gap. So close that gap with either like a rag or sponge or something like that, just to make sure that there's a minimal amount of space of where you're going to actually insert the physical nozzle of your vaporizer in as well. Right, next slide. Okay, the dosage. Now, this is a huge amount of debate. There's a lot of research out there, and what I'm seeing from it is perspective is down to a number of different characteristics and a number of different reasons why there's different volumes. And first of all, coming simply down to the quality of the oxalic acid you have. So if you've got oxalic acid that maybe is not very strong, then you generally need a little bit more. If the quality of the heating instrument, we sort of touched on as well, so that's why we're saying 230 to 280 degrees Celsius. If you're doing that, then generally, again, you don't need as much oxalic acid because you're obviously burning that oxalic acid to an optimum amount as well. And then obviously colony size. So if you've got a smaller colony, you don't necessarily need to do a full dose. You can bring that down. So like a nuke, for example, obviously it needs much less than you would have, let's say, a double brood box as well. But the general contention that we are getting from a lot of the manufacturers is if you've got really good quality oxalic acid that's part of your vaporizer, then generally it's 2 grams for a single box or 3 grams for a double box. However, if you've got a bad case of varroa, then you may want to push up to 4 as well. That's why the high counts go there. But also another thing that affects the physical amount of dosage, again, is if you've got a lot of gaps and holes and you need to maybe block it off a little bit earlier, then maybe you do need a bit more because you're obviously losing a lot of that vaporization, that vapor going out. But again, be careful in that case because you obviously might be on the other end of that as coming out. You want to try and minimize that escape so it stays inside the hive, not coming out at you. So, okay. So we sort of talked a bit about broodless state, as we are aware that Australia is very, very difficult to achieve that. The only time we might get that is in those very cold periods as well. So we can force that situation by effectively caging the queen, blocking her up, and preventing her from escaping to actually lay on those extra cells as well. So you can create an artificial brood break. Another method that people may not think is creating an artificial break. So when you're effectively doing a split of your colonies, you're trying to make multiple colonies in the future, let's say nukes, you can effectively leave 2 or 3 without a queen for a time period, and that effectively will naturally create a brood break within those splits, and you can then do a vaporization in those time frames as well. A timed requeening, you can actually, if you're going to requeen it again, pull the queen out, leave a time period before you put another queen in, and then go in. But obviously be aware, obviously, if they're going to try to make their own queen, you want to maybe keep on top of that as well. Another method is, if it comes up a second ago, we've seen that before, is effectively, this is what we talk to a lot of our customers at the moment, is I really encourage getting brood frames, or drone frames, should I say, to put inside your physical hive, get them drawn out. Now, if you do not have Varroa, this is the perfect time to get these frames into your hives, at least one per brood box if you can, or one per hive. That's usually sufficient. And the idea is to draw them out and ready for when you do get Varroa, because as we're aware, some of you may not be aware, but the numbers are thrown around between 11 to 13 times more likely a Varroa mite will be attracted to a drone cell versus a worker cell. So that's why the drone method like this is a great method to try and capture those physical Varroa mite in the cage, in the cells. So what about timing? Timing is, so when do we actually treat the actual with a vaporizer? So the main objective is obviously is maximize the amount of bees in that hive as well. So it can be done different times of the year. In Australia, because the weather's generally not too bad in temperature wise, it can be done almost any time of the year. However, this is really be aware. So those people who live in particularly north of Victoria or really cold areas, or maybe like in some of the cooler, higher altitudes, then this is something to be aware. Yes, you might get a brood break, which is absolutely perfect for doing a vaporization, but be aware on another context is that when we have cold periods, we find the bees will cluster together. And if you think about it, they'll cluster quite close. So if you're trying to do vaporization, sometimes it's hard to get the vapors in a very, very tight ball of bees. And if you've got Varroa in the middle, that it's unlikely that you're going to get the vapors in between those bees to get to the Varroa mite as well. So there's a double-edged sword on this one. Yes, you get the brooder's perspective sometimes, but you might have a very tight ball of bees where you may not be able to penetrate that with a vaporization as well. So if we talk about actual time of day where we're going to actually do the vaporization, it is either very first thing in the morning, but I personally prefer the dusk. And the simple reason behind that is getting towards the end of the day, the bees have come back and I'm going to have to do a few things, which means they'll have to stay in the hive a little bit longer. So dusk tends to work for me better. So you maximize it in the dusk, I find is better. The time to think about, or when you may not want to do this, is those very, very hot days. So we've had a few 40-odd degree days. Those days that you're finding, the first thing is if I have to now seal that hive up after I've done a treatment, usually you seal it for between 15 to 30 minutes. I don't want those bees to overheat inside. So that can be quite dangerous. So be aware of over those days when you're trying to force the bees and not prevent them coming out to cool down. The other thing is on those really hot days, as I'm sure you get a lot of bearding. So again, when you've got bees sticking on the outside, maybe that's not a good time to do the vaporization, because blowing the vaporization on the outside on top of the bees is going to do absolutely no good. So again, you need the bees inside the hive, not on the outside as well. So those hot days may not be a good time to do it as well. Okay, so vaporizers, the actual treatment process, it can be anything from about 8 seconds, those really fast ones like the turbo we talked about, and right up to maybe the basic ones up to about 7 minutes. So it's a huge time frame between of how long the actual vaporizers take it to actually execute. So again, speak to your beekeeping supplier. They'll give you an idea of how long they take to treat as well. So if you get a lot of hives to get through, then maybe you want a slightly faster vaporizer machine to work with you. As I sort of touched on, when you actually do vaporization, you have to seal up that hive after the use. So you close it up fully, and that has been 15 to 30 minutes. That's another reason why you don't want to do on those really hot days. Okay. However, when the time is up, you remove all the ventilation, take it all off, open it up again. And because it's night, if it is going to be dusk, you're not going to get many bees coming out anyway at all. But you do not go into the hive for now another 48 hours. You're allowing two things to happen. Number one, let that oxalic acid really do its job inside. But two, you don't want to be interfering with that oxalic acid if it's slowly breaking down inside the hive. But there's also some evidence. Sometimes it takes some of the Varroa to actually take longer to die by being in the contact with these areas. So 48 hours is a good time frame to hopefully maximize the fatalities of the Varroa mite inside the physical hive. Okay, so as we are aware, we live in Australia, and unfortunately, the biggest problem we have is as the bees grow into the season, we find it very, very difficult to actually treat a single treatment because we don't have that broodless period. So we find that we have to go through a multi-cycle process. So, and most of the time, their brood will be under the cap. So you have to understand a bit of some basics. As such, in this case, how long does it take for the bees to come out of the cappings. So they're sealed, they go underneath. So drones are under the capping for around about 14 days, workers is about 12. There's a little bit of variation on those numbers. So what we have to do is try and maximize with a multi-phased approach. So that means that we don't do just one hit and walk away and expect it to be done. So we have to do hit and then come back in a few days later and repeat the process again and repeat the process again. You tend to do this over 4 cycles with about 3 to 5 days apart. And hopefully in that time frame, the actual cappings will slowly, that were sealed originally, will then open up and then allow the oxalic acid to vapors to go into every single one of the cells that were originally closed. Generally, the consensus that you'll hit about 95% of the first hit, and unfortunately, you missed that 5% underneath the capping. Then you come back again, hit hopefully 95% of that last 5% you hit, and you keep going through that process. And you repeat that process about 4 times as part of the cycle. So this gives you a little idea of a graph. Now, ignore the dates underneath that because that's done on the northern hemisphere. The same sort of principle applies. So as you hit a big hit first of all, maybe on that second one in the second red dot, you'll notice that the Avroa is quite a high count. By allowing a few days apart and hitting again, the numbers of the Avroa starts dropping and dropping and dropping. And that's what you're trying to achieve. And this is why a multi-cycle process is extremely important. So don't assume just one hit will do it. It's not a magic bullet. You do need to repeat this more than once as part of the process with oxalic acid treatments. Okay, all right, so that gives you an idea from a vaporization perspective. We're now just going to touch on a little bit oxalic acid or with a glycerine basis or glycerine and oxalic acid. These are called extended slow strips, and they are effectively strips that are available in various different places in the world, but they are an oxalic acid and a glycerine based on a type of some form cellulose based or cardboard based substrate. There's been a lot of extensive work by Randy Oliver and others as well, but they're proving to be around about 90 to 97% effective. And there's also some evidence that it does actually hit some of the Varroa underneath the cappings, but not. I wouldn't take that as gospel though. So generally, you find the Varroa has to go over the surfaces, and actually then will then die because they're in contact with the glycerine and the oxalic acid. So the glycerine acts as the carrier, but the oxalic acid is what does the business as well. But the effective time frame is anything from 8 to 10 weeks, but I would say be more conservative around about 6 to around about 9 week time frame is of how long those external strips are effective inside the hive. So again, these are not a set and forget type solution. They are a long-term ways where they can help manage and keep the Varroa mite in a flat level, but these are not a method to knock down your Varroa mite. If you're going to knock down the Varroa mite and you've got a high amount of Varroa, you use one of the first two methods, either dribble or the vaporization. The extended slow release are designed to keep things flatlined. So the way we use it is, in the sense, we may want to use a vaporizer to knock our mites down, and then we use a slow release method to try and keep everything flatlined as low as possible, as long as possible. So they have different purposes and they work in different ways. But again, they are, because they're sitting in the hive, you don't have to keep on top of the hive all the time, and that can be a huge advantage for a lot of people. So it's a lot less labor intensive as well. Again, reduce peak exposure because you're not in and outside the hive all the time, and they certainly keep the pressure on the mite low because of the oxalic acid inside the hive. Be aware as well that there are, even though this is a oxalic acid and is still in a different substrate, you still need to have some PPE equipment. It's not as intensive as a vaporization, but you still need to have some gloves, eye protection, and obviously some respiratory protection as well if you're going to apply these as well. So just be careful, particularly if you're preparing these as well. The two main sources that I've seen around are, one is called Bee Equip in New Zealand. They use extensively over there and other places in the world. And Allen Cap is now under emergency license as well. So that is now available as well under the emergency license perspective as well. Inside there. Okay. So on conclusion, this is a top level perspective. Yes, exactly is how effective they are. So if you want a really effective method, you can either, I would go with either the dribble or the vaporization. In that case there, slow release works very well from a perspective of trying to keep those mites at a low level for a lot longer period, but you do need to get them to that low level first. So out of all this, the most popular is still the vaporization to try and get those mites right down. But again, there's still a risk to us as human beings. So we have to be careful of that. But as long as we take the appropriate precautions, it should be pretty good. So again, if you look on the right-hand side under vaporization, yes, it is absolutely mandatory. You use a proper good quality mask with a correct type of filter. Maybe the dribble is maybe the safest out the lot because when it's in a liquid form, it's easy to handle. You haven't got any dust particles. But the slow release method is a bit of a mix between the two, depending on how you go about using your slow release strips as well. Now we're getting towards the end now, but one thing I want to just to highlight a couple of things that is oxalic acid, as we know, is still an acid. So what I would look at trying to do, if you want to be super cautious, you can make effectively an alkaline. In this case, a baking soda solution. So it's about 15 grams of baking soda with 1 liter of water. So if you do splash some oxalic acid on you or by some form of way, you can actually dribble the actual solution of the baking soda over the top. So effectively try and neutralize it. So you've got, remember, the acid, which is the oxalic acid, the alkaline, which is the baking soda, and then hopefully the two together will neutralize on skin. So it's a good way to do that. If you do have issues or gets in your eyes or things like, highly recommend going to a doctor as soon as possible. So that, okay. And one of the last things to be aware of is the time of year. Now we are unfortunately only about 3 or 4 weeks or so before end of summer officially ends, as we're aware, but we are about to go into autumn. And this is a really interesting graph. The months are a little bit out, but the same sort of principle applies. So we are obviously going, if you look at that yellow curve, we're going over the top of that yellow curve. We're only slowly starting to come down over the other side. But if you look at that dark red burgundy color, that is the mites. So, contrary to belief, the amount of colonies lost due to Varroa is not the winter, is not the spring, is actually autumn. And there's a number of reasons behind that. First of all, the queens actually are starting to slow down their laying, and therefore the actual size of the colonies are starting to drop. But the mites aren't; they're just carrying on. So therefore, there's a disparity between the two. But the main reason, if we think about it, is also prime time for when colonies get weaker and robbing occurs. And robbing means effectively they are going to weaker colonies, which potentially are infestated with actual varroa mite, hopping onto your nice bee and then bringing it back into your colony. So beware. So I want to really please say that keep an eye on your colonies, particularly from now onwards and going into the autumn, because that is when we might find this high infestation of potentially varroa mite into the hives. So this is where washers, inspections are really, really quite important at this time frame. So yeah, I think that's it. Okay. So this is the oxalic acid is a great versatile product as long as you use it wisely and use it carefully and you follow the appropriate instructions and safety elements. It is quite a good product to use. It's been around for many years, but it is important that you follow the appropriate guidelines. It is also a good part of the IPM triangle. So it hits in that red area at the very top. So it's a great form of that treatment if it gets to the pointy end that you need to hit those mites down. And so that concludes our presentation. So hopefully gave a good top overview of what we're talking about for oxalic acid. So in short point of view, if you want to knock those mites down and you want to keep to an organic based solution, then I would look at the first two, either dribble or the vaporization. But if you want to maintain them down and keep them flat, then maybe a strip system might be a great way to keep them down. Now, we're based on the east side of Melbourne. I certainly invite you to come over and have a chat to us. If you want to have a natter or phone calls, please, I'd love to have a chat with you. Mike and other people in our business are also around for you. So please do come on down and have a chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Graham. That was fantastic, really interesting. We have got some questions that have come in, so we're going to bring them up on the screen and quiz you. So let's see what we've got. Tino, can you bring a question forward?
Yeah, so we've got one here. Do you have to be aware of where the queen is if you're applying the dribble format? Do you need to avoid getting the treatment on the queen or actually where are you focusing? Are you trying to get the dribble on the comb, or do you just blindly put it between the frames?
It's a very good question. The difficulty is sometimes, yes, if you want to do this properly, I would try and find the queen, maybe isolate it temporarily, do the dribble, then apply it. Unfortunately, when you let it go, she could walk back down onto the actual dribbled areas as well. So it's going to be almost unavoidable. The dribble test is one of the harshest methods for the bees in the colony, and that's why it's only applied generally once a year. There are some brands out there recommend you can do twice, but it is quite a harsh method. So back to the question, I would potentially try and take it out, but then unfortunately the queen might come in contact later with that dribble. So it's hard to avoid, unfortunately.
Okay, we've
So on
got
a
a couple
related
of
question, oh, go ahead. I was just going to say,
Sorry.
just it's a related question.
Finish.
So should you always expect mortality after you do treatments, or are there signs that the treatment has gone well versus has the treatment been maybe harmful?
Regarding bee mortality, long as you are using within the guidelines, that's why it's only 50 milliliters for a dribble. Oxalic acid, as long as you keep those low numbers. If you talk about what is the detrimental amount of oxalic acid for vaporization, it is actually around about 20 grams. It's enormous, huge. It's really, really high. It's unlikely you're going to get anywhere close to that from a that perspective, where you would get mortality from a vaporization as well. Regarding the strips, it's just a low dose already anyway, so that's a slow release method. But I think the safest out of all of them would be vaporization.
Okay, now we've got a couple of questions come in about the vaporization and whether you really do need to seal up the hive. So there's the first one, who says that the USA people are not doing it right, which is consistent with what we think. And there's another one here who says that the New South Wales people aren't doing it right either. Would you comment, please?
Yeah, I've heard of this a few people, and I can understand when time is pressure, particularly when you've got a lot of hives to get through. I know there's a lot of people not necessarily sealing up the hives, and the way they overcome it, they are putting a greater dose of oxalic acid in to try and compensate for that. Yes, it can be, but the problem is if you don't necessarily seal up to a certain extent, you're not necessarily going to push up the vapors into the higher frames, particularly if you've got a double brood box. On the flip side of that, one way they're getting around that is rather putting particularly something like a vaporizer, which you've got a small hole like into VAPs, where you actually have a round hole. You can actually put a drill hole in the center of one of the central boxes, and you apply the oxalic acid at that point. So that's a way they sometimes get around. Rather than putting it through the bottom and trying to feed it upwards through the entrance, you are doing it through the center and then going down. But if you're going to go down this way, you need to be in the center of one of the center boxes and not from the side, because you're trying to spread it out from left and right of all your frames as well. So yeah, there's a lot of people not necessarily closing up the hives, but it's still going on, but they're trying to compensate with maybe more oxalic acid. But then the problem is, what is that magic amount? Is what's the amount of oxalic acid do you put in? That's the difficulty.
So we've got a question. Would it be correct to say that some OA vaporizers have more precise temperature controls than others, and assume also that the more precise the controls, the more expensive they are?
Not necessarily more expensive, but generally they are a little bit more precise because there's more electronics involved, and they tend to be more electronic versus the gas. Gas, you can still do it to a point, but you need to know either you calibrate it or work it out yourself. But certainly the electronic ones, because there's sensors built into them, they can actually work out what the temperature is, and therefore they can control what those temperature ranges are. And I think that also not just from a temperature range, but they can also climatically control with the thermostat perfectly, trying to keep the temperature consistent as well from one treatment to the next one as well. So generally they're more electronic versus maybe other types. And back to the cost, yeah, they can be a little bit more expensive, but there's a reason because there's a lot of electronics behind them as well.
Do you have ballpark what the range is? The low end price, high end price for vaporizer?
So we've got. I can only speak for ourselves. We've got some low end ones from around about 350 that are maybe 240 volts. So you need a physical mains. That's the main. That's maybe a negative side of it. Right up to I guess our turbo, which is more full fledged commercial. Job done in 8 seconds, and that's about $950. But a lot of people are looking at maybe the middle of the road, about they call it the light, which is about 550 mark. So it's still a bit of investment there. Yeah. Sorry, carry on. Sorry.
There's a comment here from Mike Allerton about Baverol
Mhm.
leading to resistance, but I think it also introduces us to give you an opportunity to talk about oxalic acid resistance and the lack of resistance that we believe happens with oxalic.
Yeah. So just I can't say what and how Baverol and the others are becoming resistant. To my understanding, they just are from a synthetic chemical perspective. Apivar is maybe the one common we're hearing from the States where you applying multiple treatments over the years. It's just becoming less and less effective in the use, and therefore believing that the resistance to the mite is definitely the case. Back to the oxalic acid perspective, is as I sort of described a bit earlier in the presentation, the Varroa is actually absorbing it through their feet and into the nervous system, and therefore it's directly going into the extra Varroa. And there's been a huge amount of research. Those were at the VAA conference last June in Beechworth with Cameron Jack, if I remember correctly. He was talking about it, and he was also re-emphasizing that there's literally no evidence at the moment showing of resistance of oxalic acid to any Varroa mite at the moment. So it's a great one of the reasons why it's been so popular. I just have to emphasize a little bit more on that. Sorry. It also explains why some countries around the world, let's particularly a lot of East European countries, where they are using oxalic acid 100%. They're not used anything but, and because of that simple reason as well.
So there's a few questions about the strips, and so I posted one. So is there a reason why we wouldn't just keep slow release strips in our hives at all time? A variation or an alternate question is, do you wait to reach a threshold in mite load before you apply the strips, or if you detect them in some drone brood, do you put them in right away? Yeah, so just talking about the
Good
strips.
question. Good question. So slow release strips are designed to keep things flat lined. It's not going to bring things down. So back to your question, we've got some hives up in Brisbane. We actually got very quickly onto one of our hives, and we actually noticed it there. So we put strips straight in. We didn't do any vaporization. We went straight into the strips at a very low level, and that worked very, very well to keep them at a low level. However, if you're a little bit late getting back to them, those strips, and actually taking them out, unfortunately, you're going to find the actual mite levels will slowly go up a bit more. The other thing on the strips, just to be clear of, we have heard some cases, even though it's got that 6 to 9 week period is where they are very effective, it can vary depending on each hive. But we've also heard some hives, because some of them are made of cardboard, the bees are eating through those strips within about 5 weeks, literally eating to nothing. So if you come back, let's say, in 6 weeks later, and you might actually have no strips there at all. So you have to be on top of it a little bit more. So I wouldn't go to the extreme of when you expect the time frame would be there. So you sometimes, the long story short, you might miss that window expecting that the hive is actually safe, where it may not be, and therefore the strips, you might find the Varroa might start going up again. So you might have to jump in with something else than just the strips, just to bring them back down again.
Okay, here's a question from somebody about top bar hives. What sort of treatment would you recommend for them?
Top bar hives and long langs are interesting ones. That, again, I would be tempted to. Yes, you can. There's no reason why you can't use the strip method in there as well. Long spread that across the hives. Again, remember, this is all across the actual brood area, not in the honey soup as well when you're applying these treatments. And I don't see a reason why you can't use any of these treatments. The top bar hive might be difficult because the gaps are very tight along the top. Maybe the long langs are easier. But you can certainly, from a vaporization, do from the side of the actual hive. You could actually potentially have holes that you opened up where you can inject in those different places along the hive itself. A little tip on that point: if you are going to put a hole in the side of the hive for ejecting and oxalic acid, like vaporization, one of the tips is using golf tees with a golf tee and just plug it in. And that closes up the hole for next time. So when you're ready, you just pull the golf tee out and you can do another vaporization. Might be a tip as well. Hopefully it helps.
All right, I think we're coming to the end of our questions, Graham. That's been a tour de force. Thank you very much indeed. That's really excellent to provide that information to all our viewers, and we really appreciate your time. So thank you very much. Now,
With
I'm
absolute
going to
pleasure.
switch across now to our VAA.
Thanks, Andrew. We have so many exciting projects on the go at the VAA. I'm just going to update you on a couple of ones coming up. We have a Varroa workshop for commercial beekeepers on Monday, the 9th of March. We're holding it up in the Northeast in Swanpool. And this project is funded by a grant that we received last year through DECA's Biosecurity Livestock Education Fund. And the grant is helping us evolve and adapt and expand our capabilities to offer education and improve communications to not only our members, but beekeepers all across Victoria. So this is an advanced course on Varroa management for commercial beekeepers. Um, if you're not fully commercial, but you manage a large number of hives, say 30 to 50 hives, you'd be certainly welcome to attend. But the topics and the content that we'll be delivering is at an advanced level. We're holding it at an amazing historic venue in Swanpool. It's a memorial hall. It was built in the 50s. It's a cinema that's still used. And it's going to be an amazing day of networking, learning, and connecting with other beekeepers who are managing this parasite. There's no fee for this. It's a free because we're funding it through this government grant, but you do have to register. So you can go to the website and click on our events link, and you can register for the event. It's fully catered. We'll be serving lunch and morning and afternoon tea. And our affiliate club, the Northeast Apiarist Association, is sponsoring a barbecue social after the workshop. So it's going to be a great day, great event. And we encourage you to reserve a spot and join us in Swanpool on Monday the 9th. Now, we're also looking for nominations for our resources subcommittee. So for those of you who don't know, resources in beekeeping terminology refers to areas such as access to bee sites on public land, agricultural chemical use and standards, regulations. And it's one of the most important, strategically most important areas of focus for the VAA. And we are recruiting nominations for the 2026 to 2028 term. It's a 2-year term. And we have several positions. We've got the chair of the subcommittee, the secretary of the subcommittee, and then we have 6 regional representatives that cover the whole state. And we have meetings maybe 3 or 4 times a year. The work of the subcommittee is supported by me, the administration officer for the VA. And it would be a great opportunity if you're interested to really help shape the strategy for the VA and apiculture in general across the state. I've been to several of the meetings. They're interesting. You meet great people and you work on important projects. So I would strongly encourage you to think about putting your name forward. You can nominate yourself or you can nominate someone else. If you're nominating someone else, we do ask that you get their agreement that they want to be nominated and participate on the subcommittee. The one key thing, though, is the deadline for nominations is this Sunday at midnight. So if you're thinking of nominating yourself or someone else, contact the VAA through our email address, vaa@vicbeekeepers.com.au, and we'll send you a nomination form or we'll just take the information via email. The VA board is meeting on Monday, and one of the things on the agenda is to look at the nominations and put together the new subcommittee. So this is a really exciting opportunity, and we hope to see lots of nominations for this.
Thank you very much. Pleased to announce that we've got a new initiative here. This is the Apiary Diary, which is reality TV for beekeepers. We're going to follow our talent as he contends with Varroa over the next year or so, and we're going to share his journey and see how well he copes with Varroa. He may or may not succeed, of course, and we'll be following this closely. So please enjoy.
So I'm going to be inspecting the hive this afternoon, and I have 3 things that I'm going to check on. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, I added this box, and I did a checkerboard pattern with the frames, the additional frames. And so I want to get a sense of how well the colony is expanding into the new space and how much food they're bringing in. Earlier in the season, I had an issue with chalk brood, and there was some condensation in the lid. So I've added some matchsticks just underneath the lid to create a little bit more ventilation. And I want to check and see if that's been helpful. I did notice when I came up to the hive today that there wasn't any chalk brood showing, so I'm pleased about that. And the third thing I'm going to do is add a sticky mat into the bottom of the hive. So I've already smoked the hive. So let's open up. Yeah, not as strong a brood pattern as I'd like to see. So again, it could just be a slow start to the season. I'm just going to have to keep an eye on this colony. They are storing quite a bit of pollen. I always have a metal bucket for my smoker so that smoker doesn't come in contact with anything that could burn. And I always have a source of water, particularly in the hot and dry season. I typically spray down the area around the hive so that if any spark comes out of the smoker, that it's less likely to catch fire. And if anything does spark or start to smolder, I have a ready source of water to douse that fire. Thanks very much for tuning in to another episode of the Apiary Diary. Look forward to coming back in a couple of weeks.
And finally, we'll just wrap up with a heads up in terms of the March HiveMeet. We're hoping to invite back Joe Reardon, who was our guest in December when we had the unfortunate audio issues. And he's going to be talking about this really fascinating technique of beelining, where you're able to look for patterns in the flight paths of bees and help get the bees to help you locate the feral colonies, which could become very helpful in the reinfestation period of Varroa. So we hope you can join us next month. Stay tuned with email notices and our bi-monthly bulletin, and we'll have updates about HiveMeet and all the other amazing projects that the VA is involved in. We want to thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to be successful at meeting the challenges of Varroa, but we're going to do so together, and we're glad that we're able to help provide this forum to bring everyone together to learn from each other, learn from our experts. And again, I just want to thank Graham for an amazing presentation tonight. And we'll sign off and hope to see you next month. Thanks very much.